Being an introvert can make it harder to process and articulate your thoughts when you're in a room full of talkative, extroverted people. But this struggle never has to stop you. In today's episode, I'm sharing introvert-friendly tools to help you articulate your thoughts with polish so you can speak up powerfully, get noticed, and build a reputation as a strong and capable leader. No extroversion required. Let's dive in. Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the podcast. Today's episode is a super special one. This is for my fellow introverts. So I am an introvert, and most of the women who are attracted to my work, and for sure most of the women who join my program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy, identify as being an introvert. And as someone who is an introvert myself and who coaches mostly women who are also introverts, I'm super familiar with all of the challenges that come up when you're an introvert working in a corporate setting and you're highly ambitious and you want to get recognized as a leader. And in today's episode, I wanted to deep dive specifically into the challenges that you might face as an introvert when it comes to communication and being a strong voice in the room and really being a powerful contributor and a thought leader when you're in meetings and conversations with your boss and with higher up leaders and executives at your company. In today's episode, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be walking you through the 3 big challenges that introverts face when it comes to speaking up and being a strong communicator and a confident voice in the room. I think that this might really help you better understand your own experience and any obstacles you might be facing as an introvert. And then most importantly, what I want to do today is I want to give you tips and advice to help you not allow being an introvert to get in the way of the potential contribution that you are able to make as a leader. Because as you're going to hear me talk about quite passionately in this episode, I don't at all believe that introversion has to be any sort of barrier to you creating the success that you want to create and building the reputation that you want to build professionally. Yes, it might create challenges that you have to learn to overcome, but my perspective on introversion and really any sort of obstacle you might face, any sort of quote unquote flaw you might think you have, I just think it never has to prevent us from getting what we want and going after what we want. And so I want you to leave this episode no longer seeing introversion as a problem. And the truth is, I think sometimes as introverts, we can really glorify extroversion. And I do think we sometimes experience a grass is greener thing where we assume that if we were just extroverts, everything would be so much easier for us. But the truth is, I've seen over and over working primarily with women who are introverts that while introversion can create certain challenges for sure, and I'm going to talk about them, I've also noticed that introverts also possess really interesting and unique problem solving and pattern spotting talents and capabilities that are sometimes unique to introverts. So that's something important for you to keep in mind, which is that there's no side of the coin that's perfect. All of these different personality structures and character traits have benefits and drawbacks. But I know that you might feel very in touch with the ways in which introversion makes it difficult for you to show up powerfully in the room at work. So I want to start by breaking down the 3 different ways that being an introvert can make it hard to have a voice in the room. And by the way, if you're new here, I'm Jess. I'm the creator of this show. I'm a prior successful executive in the corporate world. I used to work at McKinsey and Company, and then I was an executive at the Walt Disney Company. And now I am the host of this show and the creator of my signature program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. So if you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found the show. And if you've been listening for a while, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 challenges that make it difficult for an introvert to be a really powerful voice in the room. So I'm going to give an overview of the 3 challenges, and then I'm going to use a painting analogy to help us all learn more about these challenges so that you can understand yourself more deeply. So the 3 challenges that I see introverts face when it comes to verbalizing their thoughts and participating in work conversations with ease are: number 1, processing information quickly and on the spot. Number 2, discerning their own thoughts and opinions quickly and on the spot. And number 3, expressing their thoughts and opinions quickly and on the spot. So the best way for me to share these 3 challenges with you is through an analogy. So I want you to think about it as you're looking at a painting. And I want you to imagine this painting is the type of painting where when you look at it up close, it just looks like random brush strokes. But when you step back from the painting and view it from a distance, you can see that it's, a beautiful landscape of rolling hills, or, you can see whatever the subject of the painting is. Maybe it's a still life, maybe it's clouds, maybe it's a ballerina. But it's the kind of painting where you can't tell what it is until you move a little bit farther away from it. So having a work conversation with your colleagues is a lot like you looking at a painting. So when you're looking at that kind of painting, the first thing that you're doing is figuring out, what is this painting, right? Like you look at it and you see all these brush strokes and you can't immediately tell what it is. And one of your goals is to figure out, what is this a painting of? What is it I'm looking at? The same is true in a work conversation. When your colleagues are sharing slides or giving a verbal update, you're listening to what they're saying. And it's almost as if the words that they're saying and the sentences that they're saying are brush strokes, like the brush strokes on the painting. But you need to spend some mental energy figuring out the meaning of what they're saying, figuring out the bigger picture of what they're saying so that it really clicks for you in your mind. So it's very similar to looking at that painting and being like, okay, I see red and I see yellow and I see blue, but what is this a painting of? Just like when your colleague presents a slide to everyone in the room and starts talking through the slide, you're listening to each thing they're saying and you're trying to understand, what exactly is the message here? What is the piece of information that they're really communicating? What does this mean? Now, when it comes to processing information, figuring out what it means, figuring out what the painting is, figuring out what it is your colleague is saying, I have found that introverts prefer to do that on their own. I'm laughing because I'm an introvert, so I deeply relate. But for us introverts, when we are looking at the painting and trying to figure out what this painting is, or trying to understand what is my colleague saying, we prefer to process the information in a setting that is quiet, in a setting where there aren't other people around us talking, and in a setting where we have time and space free from the interaction with other people to really process the information. I have found that most introverts process best alone. Now, we can start to see why this would bring up challenges in a work setting or a work environment where you are expected to contribute to the conversation and be a thought leader, but it is difficult for you to make sense of what is being said in the conversation when you are around other people and when you are not alone. And by definition, if you're in a work meeting or in a work conversation, you are never alone. So it becomes this inherently challenging situation for introverts. But there's more to the story. So after you look at this painting and you figure out what it is, and you're like, oh, it's a still life. It's a bowl of apples and bananas against the backdrop of clouds and sky. After you figure that out, the next thing that you have to do that can feel really tricky for introverts is you then have to discern your own thoughts. So seeing the painting and realizing that it's a still life of a fruit bowl is not the same as you figuring out if you like the painting and what you like about the painting and what you don't like about the painting and what you would change about the painting. That is a completely separate step that happens after you have figured out what the painting is. So step 1, what is it? Step 2, do I like it? So similarly, in a work conversation, the first thing you have to do is figure out what is being shared. You have to make sense of it. You have to comprehend it, just like you have to comprehend the painting. But it doesn't end there. After you comprehend what is being said, then you need to discern your own thoughts. So in a work conversation, that might look like you figuring out, do I agree that this is the best approach for us as a cross-functional team? Or is there any place where my team can help with this? Or can my expertise be leveraged to contribute to this? Or do I see any red flags or potential future obstacles that would be helpful for the group to know about? So once you understand the painting, aka once you understand what is being shared, you then have to figure out all of your thoughts on that thing. This too can be very challenging for introverts. And just like we like to figure out what the heck the painting is in a setting where we're alone and it's quiet, when it comes to this next step and this step of figuring out what are my thoughts on this, what do I think of this, how can I help with this, we do that better alone. It is easier for us to do that when it is quiet and when no one is speaking. And again, I'm laughing because I relate to this so deeply. And sometimes I too feel really jealous of extroverts. But don't worry, we're going to talk about how to get past these barriers. But first, I want to talk about the final challenge and barrier that introverts face, which is expressing your thoughts. So step 1 is processing the information, figuring out what is this a painting of. Step 2 is figuring out your own thoughts about that information. So do I like the painting? Do I have suggestions? What is my opinion on what is being shared? And then the final step is then articulating those thoughts and taking all of those thoughts that you came up with and expressing them vocally by communicating and speaking up in the room. And that is a completely different step. Like these 3 steps, while they happen in rapid succession, they're 3 completely different processes. Figuring out what the painting is completely different than deciding what you like or don't like about the painting. And that's also completely different than expressing what you like or don't like about the painting. So with the painting example, expressing your thoughts would look like you saying, I enjoy the brush strokes and the colors on this painting, but I'm not a huge fan of still lifes. I would prefer a portrait of someone, or I would prefer maybe more of a landscape or a snapshot of nature. Likewise, when you're in meetings and conversations at work, after you've gone through the step of understanding what is being said, and then you've also gone through the step of discerning your own thoughts, you then need to verbalize those thoughts. And you need to figure out, okay, how am I going to say this? How am I going to express this idea that I have about this piece of information that is being shared with me? And once again, as introverts, we prefer to have time and space to do this. So we feel much more comfortable if we have lots of time to craft a beautiful email asking our question or sharing our opinion. But if we have to verbalize our opinion quickly and on the spot, that can feel really, really challenging. And the reason that I'm sharing these 3 pieces of the challenge with you is to really give you an invitation to offer yourself a lot of grace and understanding for why this might be challenging, because it truly is a lot that our brain has to do. And if we're introverts, we are pretty much asking our brains to do a lot of intense and deep thinking in a way that goes against the grain of our natural preferences. So of course, this is going to feel really hard. However, I will share something that I come back to all of the time, that I have a Post-it of, that has changed my life and that has helped me achieve things in my career and my life that I didn't think I could achieve. And my Post-it phrase that is like one of my most favorite ones ever is, "This is hard, but not impossible." This is hard, but not impossible. When I hear this phrase, it reminds me to slow my brain down and make sure that when I encounter something hard, my brain isn't leaping to, "This is impossible and I can't do this." Because the truth is, we are so often underestimating the extent of what we are capable of accomplishing. And I know from personal experience, as well as from me working with so many women who identify as introverts, I know that this is a level of hard that can be overcome if you are willing to have that deeper belief in yourself. And if you are willing to find that part within yourself that knows that you can push one level deeper, that knows that you can do really hard things, that knows that giving up isn't really who you are. I want to help you access that part of yourself, and I want to give you some growth tips that will help you participate in work conversations with greater ease, even if you are an introvert, and even if it is difficult for you to process information, discern your thoughts, and express your thoughts when you are in a room full of people who are all interacting and talking. It is absolutely possible, and after this super quick break, I'm going to get into both the practical tips and the mindset tips that will help you as an introvert become more comfortable expressing yourself in the room. Let's take a quick break, and I'll catch you in a minute. If you are craving a deeper, more focused experience to help you become a more confident voice in the room, I want to invite you to join me in my signature program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. In this program, you'll be guided through a structured curriculum that covers the inner mindset work you need to build lasting confidence and the executive communication tools you need to speak in a way that helps you make a strong impression as a leader. To learn more about the Art of Speaking Up Academy, click the link in the show notes and make sure to add yourself to the waitlist so that you qualify for waitlist-only program bonuses. I can't wait to see you in the next cohort, and let's get back to the episode. All right, so now that we've talked a little bit about the specific challenges that introverts experience when it comes to being a voice in the room, I want to talk through some practical tips and mindset tips that I think you'll find really helpful if you're an introvert and if this feels hard for you. The reason I'm sharing both practical tips and mindset tips is because my philosophy as a coach is that we need more than surface level tips to help us achieve deeper, more lasting change. And what I have found works best is when you have a combination of really specific tactical tips and hacks you can try, combined with guidance on how to experience a deeper level of psychological change. And that's where the mindset work comes in. So let's start with the practical tips. Tip number 1 is you have to force yourself to start sharing half-baked thoughts. So if you're an introvert, especially in a room with other people who are extroverts, a lot of times you are holding yourself to a standard and you don't even realize you're doing this, but you're holding yourself to the standard of, I only want to share polished, fully baked thoughts. And while of course we want to be polished when we're speaking with executives, we have to be careful to match the expectation level of how polished we should be with what is appropriate based on the type of conversation that is happening in the room. And if the conversation that's happening in the room is highly dynamic, people are brainstorming, people are asking questions, there's a lot of back and forth, typically most people in that conversation, even the extroverts, are sharing messier, more half-baked thoughts than most of my clients are typically willing to share. So in other words, a lot of times for the women who I'm working with, and this is also something I did as well and that I had to kind of unlearn, but they're experiencing the situation as I'm having troubles contributing to this conversation the same way everyone else is contributing. But really, what's actually happening is they're holding themselves to a higher standard than what the other people in the room are doing. So the other people in the room are allowing themselves to be messy and share half-baked thoughts and share somewhat unpolished questions. And they are holding themselves to this really high standard of everything I share has to be fully baked and fully thought through. And sometimes this just isn't possible in a highly dynamic conversation. And it's not even an introvert-extrovert thing. It's literally a perfectionist, not perfectionist thing, where if you're a perfectionist, it becomes really hard to participate because you're not willing to share any thought that's half-baked. Versus if you're willing to just be a bit messier in the conversation, not only will you be able to enter into the conversation and share your thoughts, but as you share half-baked thoughts, what tends to happen is your brain starts to get warmed up and sharper as you're sharing half-baked thoughts and giving yourself permission to be messy. And it becomes easier and easier for you to become more polished as you're speaking. So in other words, if you let yourself be a little messy and share something a little half-baked, as you start talking and sharing it, a lot of times that's going to help you relax and your thoughts are going to start to naturally organize themselves simply because you gave yourself permission to start talking, and that helped get your brain a little warmed up and that helped you get into a flow. So the first practical tip that I want to share is if you're ever in a situation where it's feeling very difficult for you to vocalize your thoughts and be a part of the conversation, look around and be really honest with yourself about whether everyone around you is sharing perfectly polished, perfectly baked, beautiful thoughts, or if they're sharing messier thoughts, because that is what makes sense for the conversation that's right in front of you. And if you're seeing other people around you sharing messy thoughts, you have to give yourself permission to do the same. And you have to challenge yourself to face the discomfort that comes with that. I'll never forget this one moment that I had in my career where I was in a meeting and several members of my company's C-suite were at that meeting. The CFO was there, the CEO was there. And I remember the finance team was presenting and they put up a slide. And I was looking at this slide and I was like, oh, I don't understand it, but I'm not going to say anything because everyone else understands it and I don't want to look messy and stupid. And then the CFO asked the exact half-baked, confused question that I had in my head. And in that moment, I realized that I was essentially holding myself to a standard that was higher than what our CFO was holding himself to. And I realized how absurd it was that I was doing that to myself. And that helped me be messier because when the CFO asked that messy, quote unquote, stupid question, I had more respect for him. It made him look more engaged, more like a leader. And I started to realize how irrational my own thought process was, where I thought that holding back and only saying really polished things and asking really polished questions was making me look so good. And I realized how confident you look when you're just willing to get in there and engage in the conversation to get the information that you need and ask the questions that you have to ask. And so for me, that really changed my view from I don't want to ask anything stupid or say anything messy to I want to be the person in the room who everyone can clearly tell is the most focused, the most confident, and the most determined because they are contributing to the conversation and getting what they need. So I pivoted from wanting to be perfect, quote unquote, to wanting to be the most focused and confident and determined. And that really helped me become more comfortable sharing half-baked thoughts and sharing thoughts and ideas and questions that aren't perfect. So that is tip number 1. Tip number 2, this has saved my life. Learn how to buy yourself time. One of the most beautiful gifts you can give yourself is the gift of knowing how to slow down a conversation so that you get a little bit more time to think and organize your thoughts. So the best way to buy yourself time in a conversation is to ask open-ended questions to the other stakeholders in the room and to use that extra time to both hear what they are saying and allow your own thoughts to develop further. So a few examples of open-ended questions you can ask to slow down a conversation and help buy yourself some time to think is, can you walk me through your thinking? Or can you share more of your thought process? Or, oh, that's interesting. How did your team get to that? So these open-ended questions help you join in the conversation without you having to really organize your thoughts. But then once you ask them, you have a little bit of time to then organize your thoughts and figure out how you want to contribute. The next tip, this is really important. If you are going to share thoughts that are a little bit messy or a little bit unstructured, I recommend caveating your thoughts before you start sharing them. So if you give your stakeholders or your audience a heads up that you're about to share unstructured thoughts with them, it makes you look more polished because you are telling them what to expect, and it gives you permission to be a little bit messier in the way you respond. So some examples of how you could do this to help you buy yourself permission to be a little bit messy when you're speaking is you could say things like, okay, I want to think through this out loud. Here are my thoughts. Or you could say, all right, let me walk you through where my thought process is going so far. Or you could say, all right, here are a few thoughts that are coming up for me as we're discussing this. And then you could list them out, 1, 2, and 3. When you let people know that you're sharing more of an open view of your thought process rather than something super polished, first of all, that takes the pressure off of you because you're setting that bar in the appropriate place. But funny enough, it actually makes you look more polished, especially if you say it with a lot of confidence. You end up looking more polished. And it's also very helpful for your stakeholders because when your stakeholders know that you're sharing just your thought process as it's developing in the moment, that helps them understand how to respond to you. They know that you're not necessarily sharing your final opinion or like the official decision on this. You're just gathering all of the thoughts that are coming up to help move the discussion forward. And sometimes that is what's needed in a discussion. Sometimes it's not helpful to go straight to the perfect polished answer. Sometimes we actually need to be in the problem-solving process longer so that we have enough time to find the right solution. So I don't necessarily think of sharing our in-process thoughts as always bad and sharing polished, definitive thoughts as always good. I think about it as context dependent. If we are in a context where an executive is expecting us to come to them with polished thoughts and findings, of course, we don't want to open the meeting being like, I'm just going to walk you through some unstructured thoughts. That's not going to go over well. They're going to want to see that you've got the structure, you've thought it through, it's super polished. But if you're in a meeting where problems are being solved live in the meeting and where everyone in the conversation hasn't yet arrived at the solution, then trying to be perfectly polished is detrimental because it isn't polish that helps you find a solution. It's that open-ended exploration and pressure testing and sharing ideas that helps you get to that polished solution. So it's so important to be aware of what's needed in the room. And if a problem is being solved or if the conversation is incredibly dynamic, don't be afraid to share less polished thoughts. And you can caveat them by saying, all right, I want to walk you through my raw thought process as I'm taking this in. When you say that, no one's going to be thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's sharing her unpolished thoughts. If you say it with confidence, they're going to be thinking, wow, she's really present. She's really engaged. She really wants to make sure that we move this forward. So she's contributing to the conversation. So that was the third tip, which is to caveat your thoughts and let your audience know in advance that you're sharing more unstructured thoughts with them. The final tip to help you get better at expressing yourself on the spot, even as an introvert, is to seize opportunities to practice. The more that you can practice forcing yourself to come up with thoughts on the spot, the more your brain will learn that you are able to do this, and that even when it feels like you're mentally stuck and you can't come up with something, that's just an illusory wall that looks like a wall, but that is something that you can move past. So any situation where you have the opportunity to engage in small talk or to practice thinking on the spot, I encourage you to seize that opportunity to practice. So maybe you're at the checkout aisle at the grocery store. I want you to force yourself to ask a question to the person who is helping you check out your groceries. Or maybe you are at the cash register at the car wash. Can you ask a question or say something to that person as you're paying for your car wash? It doesn't matter what the situation is at all. Any situation where you have a thought of, I don't know what to say, I don't want to say anything, this is uncomfortable, I just want to be quiet, that is literally the perfect situation for you to challenge yourself to come out of your shell and find something that you can contribute. And it's so important because when you do that, you're generating tangible evidence that your abilities are deeper than what you think they are. So you're generating evidence that even if your brain says, I'm so awkward, I have nothing to ask this grocery store employee, they're going to think I'm weird, I'm going to look stupid. When your brain has all those thoughts and then you say to them, do you have any plans for the weekend? And their face lights up and they're like, oh, I'm going to see that new movie. I'm so excited. Have you seen it? Your brain has a moment of healthy dissonance where suddenly you're thinking, oh, I thought I was going to be so awkward. I thought I had nothing to say. I thought I can't come up with anything on the spot. I thought this person would think I'm weird. But then I forced myself to speak up anyway, and they responded really positively. Maybe some of my thoughts about how I can't come up with anything and I'm such an introvert and I can't do this, maybe some of those limiting thoughts are wrong. Okay. So those were the 4 practical tips, and I'll quickly summarize them. They are, number 1, don't be a perfectionist. If other people in the room are sharing messy thoughts, you should too. Number 2, learn to slow the conversation down and buy yourself time by asking people open-ended questions. Number 3, if you're about to share messy, unstructured thoughts, caveat those thoughts by saying, all right, let me just share with you the thoughts that are coming up for me in the moment. And number 4, seize opportunities to practice small talk. Okay, so those were the practical tips. Let's move into the mindset tips. So I have 2 mindset tips, and they are both incredibly important, both for the topic of today's episode and just for your mindset growth and your self-confidence growth as a whole. So the first mindset tip is to make sure that you are not confusing being unskilled with being inferior. So being unskilled means you are missing a skill. Being inferior means you are worse than other people. You are just like objectively a worse human than others. And a lot of times, if you're a perfectionist or a high achiever, you mix those things together. And if you are unskilled, you assume that you're inferior to other people. And what follows logically from that is that you assume to be as good as other people, you have to become more skilled. That might feel like really true to you. And you might be hearing that and thinking, yes, Jess, that is real. That is a fact. What else could possibly be true? If you're thinking that, I really need you to have an open mind with this, but it's so important. I would love to invite you to shift the way you think about what it means to be confident. Confidence does not come as a result of being good at everything and being strong in every single area. Confidence comes as a result of how you interpret your weaknesses. So in other words, a lot of times we think for me to feel confident, I have to be good at everything. And when I'm good at everything, and when I don't struggle to speak up in the room, and when I don't have all these obstacles as an introvert, then I'm going to feel confident. What I want to offer to you is that confident people have flaws just like you do. They might not have the same flaws as you, but everyone has flaws. And it's not that the people who are confident have fewer flaws and the people who are less confident have more flaws, even though I know that can feel really true. What it actually is is that everyone has flaws. I mean, we can't measure them quantitatively, but we know logically all humans have flaws. But what I have found to be true is that confident people don't experience their flaws as being so dire and so big and so intensely problematic. Whereas people who are struggling with confidence tend to think, oh, this is a really big problem. I'm really bad at this. This is so bad. I have to make sure no one knows about this. Why am I so bad at this? What is wrong with me? So I really think about it as the amount of flaws that you have, the amount of struggles you have, whether it's the struggle of being an introvert or whatever the specific thing is that is hard for you, it's completely irrelevant. And we think that the name of the game is to obliterate all those flaws, and it's literally couldn't be further from the truth. The name of the game is to stop making them so big. Stop interpreting them as making you less than other people. If you look around at the leaders around you in your company who are executives, who are successful, who are running your company, they have many flaws. They did not get into those positions because they are good at every single thing that you are bad at. They got into those positions because they had the audacity to not care as much as you do that they are bad at certain things. That is just the truth. And I know for so many of us, high achievers, type A women, perfectionists, we go down these rabbit holes of just trying to be perfect and good at everything. And listen, if I thought that perfectionist rabbit hole of trying to be good at everything was going to help you become an executive and become a powerful leader, I would encourage you to do it. But the reason that I'm naming it on this episode and challenging it is because I have seen over and over that it's not what leads you to actually getting promoted and creating success in a corporate environment. It's not about having a perfect portfolio of skills. It's about learning to carry yourself with the confidence of an unstoppable leader, regardless of any flaws that you might have in your skill set, any gaps that you might have in your knowledge, any challenges that you might have that maybe someone else in the room doesn't have. It's the way that you respond to those challenges and think about those challenges that is going to dictate your success. It is not the level at which you eliminate those obstacles. Now, this could sometimes feel counterintuitive because you might be thinking, Jess, I have to have skills and I have to be good at my career in order to get things done. I can't be bad at things. But what we often don't account for is the energy drain that happens when we are obsessing over things that don't actually matter as much as we think they matter. So for example, if you're an introvert in a room and you are wasting a ton of energy beating yourself up and thinking something's wrong with you because it's hard for you to share polished thoughts in the room, when in the end of the day, those polished thoughts actually aren't really needed in that room. And if you just let that go and put your energy towards being present and showing up as a leader, you would be able to make an equivalent contribution with your messy, unpolished thoughts. So a lot of times our fixation on the thing that is hard for us and our fixation on this idea that we're worse than other people, it prevents us from accessing the inner psychological resources that we need to show up strong in that situation. So the takeaway from this, what I want you to take away from this is I'd love for you to work on strengthening the following belief. The belief that I want you to strengthen is I am an introvert and it is never a problem. And by the way, we know introversion isn't an absolute barrier to success because there's a ton of successful CEOs and executives who are not just introverts, but who are not neurotypical in all sorts of different ways. There are so many examples that I could come up with of CEOs who are introverts, CEOs who openly suffer from maybe anxiety or depression, or CEOs who have ADHD. There are a myriad of examples of people who have created success even though they might not fit that stereotypical boxed in profile of how we think a leader should be. So it's really important to give yourself that same expansive permission. If I didn't give myself that permission, I never would have achieved any of the things that I was able to achieve. I wouldn't have gotten promoted, and I wouldn't have reached an executive title, and I wouldn't have started my podcast and do what I do, because I would have thought that I was missing too many skills and I needed to be more perfect. So that is the first mindset tip, which is to shift from trying to eliminate your flaws in order to feel confident to learning to feel confident regardless of your flaws. Huge game changer. Now, this second tip is really important, and I think one that you have to adopt if you want to create success in your career in a big way, and that is to be willing to embrace the role of the underdog. So what is an underdog? An underdog is someone who is missing some of the skills and qualifications that are typically needed for whatever goals that person is pursuing. So an example of an underdog would be someone who wants to be a pro basketball player, but they're really short. And we see that a lot, by the way. Or maybe someone who wants to be a finance professional and they're not good at math. Also something that we see out in the real world. But an underdog is someone who is missing a quality or a skill that we typically associate as being necessary for their goal, but who achieves the goal anyway. And we have to ask ourselves, how is it that they did that, right? How did this person who is missing one of the core things that you need for this goal, how are they able to make that happen? And there's two things that we know for sure that they did. Number one, they didn't assume that whatever thing they were missing was going to be a barrier. If they assumed it was going to be a barrier, they never would have tried, and they never would have achieved the success that they've achieved. So we know for sure that they moved forward even with less than ideal circumstances. The other thing that we know is that they found other ways to get the job done. So if a basketball player can't be really good at basketball through being tall, we know they found another way to get it done. They found a creative way to be really good at basketball. So I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is be willing to embrace being an underdog. This means, number one, not making it a problem that you are an introvert. Not thinking, oh, I'm an introvert, I can't be an effective voice in this room. Oh, I'm an introvert, I can't become an executive, or I can't get promoted, or I can't build the career that I want to build. Because we know for sure that there are examples of people, not just in the corporate world, but across industries, who had obstacles maybe even bigger than the obstacle of being an introvert. And they were still able to achieve what they wanted to achieve. But most importantly, the next part of embracing the role of the underdog is to say, how can I make it happen no matter what? How can I make it happen that I'm a strong voice in the room, even though I'm an introvert? How can I make it happen that I am known as someone who is always contributing, even if I am an introvert? And yes, as an underdog, it is harder. It is harder for me as an introvert to be in a dynamic conversation with lots of humans and to be contributing than it is for someone who is wired differently than me. However, if I decide that the fact that it is harder is going to cause me to disengage and to try less hard, as opposed to cause me to engage more deeply and try harder, then I am giving up on the potential of what I can create. So being an underdog means we have to put in more effort. We have to put in more heart. We have to put in more sweat equity in the situations where the thing that is hard for us is coming up. However, I believe that everybody has underdog situations, and it's not that successful people were never an underdog and that's how they became successful. I believe deeply that successful people are willing to be underdogs. And when they encountered that big problem or that big challenge, instead of saying, this is hard for me, I can't do it as well, they said, this is hard for me, so I'm going to really try to do it better. So as an introvert, it is really important to make this decision. Do I want to embrace the calling and the role of the underdog? And what I will say is that the more that I have pushed myself to be more vocal in work conversations, share half-baked thoughts, be willing to sound messy and awkward, the easier it became. Because in the end of the day, even though introversion does make it hard for us to process our thoughts and express our thoughts, I think in the end of the day, it's not really the introversion that is the full barrier. I think a big part of the barrier is just confidence and courage and the willingness to put ourselves out there and look imperfect. And I do think sometimes we might use introversion as a cover for that because we're scared that we might sound silly. But as we challenge ourselves to share messy thoughts and speak up, even though it's not going to sound perfectly polished, the more that we challenge ourselves to do that, the more we realize we usually don't sound stupid. We usually actually have really useful things to say. And over time, it stops feeling so hard to contribute to the conversation. So in summary, the 2 mindset tips are 1, instead of trying to become confident by not having flaws, practice feeling confident even when you do have obstacles or flaws. And number 2, be willing to embrace the role of the underdog, knowing that everyone has certain things that are going to be harder, and that if you are willing to face those things head on and tackle them and give them the best of yourself, that is ultimately what is going to make you successful. It is not about being good at everything. It is about knowing how to be the underdog when the situation calls for that. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you want to work with me more deeply to learn to express yourself confidently and powerfully, even if you're an introvert, I want to invite you to join me in the Art of Speaking Up Academy, where you will be in good company. Almost every client that I work with tends to lean on this more introverted side, and it can be so helpful when you are in a space where people are similar to you and where the learning and the work that we do is designed for you and your personality. So if you're looking for a deeper, more structured experience where you can build your confidence and become a crisper, more effective voice in the room, that is exactly what I help you with in the Art of Speaking Up Academy, and it is a very introvert-friendly experience. If you would like to learn more about the program, I strongly recommend adding yourself to the waitlist by clicking the link in the show notes. As soon as you join the waitlist, I will send you more information about the program, and everyone on the waitlist qualifies for bonuses that you only get on the waitlist. So definitely add yourself. I will put the link in the show notes. Thank you for being here. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.